Zoe and Indigenous Cause. Good evening, everyone. My name is Zoe, and I'm a member of the Native American Heritage Month Planning Committee. Before we get started with today's event, I would like to acknowledge the Anishinaabe community and the Three Fires Nation land on which we stand. As a member of the Saginaw Chippewa Indian tribe, I find it extremely important to acknowledge Michigan's foundation, our Indigenous people. This land shows us how we should take care of it and how it should take care of us. This is part 2 of our first event for the Native American Heritage Month 2020 calendar with the theme of Indigenous activism through different lenses. We are very excited for Native American Heritage Month, and for more events and information, please visit our website, which we will link in the chat. Thank you to my elders and all my relations for making these events possible.
Miigwech, Zoe, Buju, welcome. My name is Andrea Wilkerson, and I am a program manager in the Office of Multi-Ethnic Student Affairs, or MESA. And I'm the lead program manager for Native American Heritage Month. So I'm really excited to be celebrating with y'all today from the University of Michigan. We formally recognize Native American Heritage Month each November, but you'll notice we're getting a little bit of an early start this year due to the unique nature of this fall academic semester. So we're glad that you're joining us a little bit early, and we will continue this celebration through November. So like Zoe mentioned, keep an eye out. I'm gonna put the link to the website in the chat now. You can check out our other great events. And I will hand it over to Solomon.
Just in time. Good evening, everyone. My name is Solomon Milner, and I'm one of the undergraduate coordinators for this year's Native American Heritage Month. Along with Zoe, who's always amazing, I have the pleasure of introducing historian and activist Heather Bruegl. We're so happy to have her come back this year. Heather Bruegl is a member of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin and first-line descendant of Stockbridge Munsee. She is a graduate of Madonna University in Michigan and holds a Bachelor of Arts and Master of History in U.S. history. Inspired by a trip to Wounded Knee, South Dakota, a passion for Native American history was born. She has spoken for numerous groups, including the University of Michigan, College of the Menominee Nation, Shawano County Historical Society, the Kenosha Civil War Museum, Stockbridge Munsee Band of the Mohicans, and the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin. She has spoken at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh for Indigenous Peoples Day 2017. Heather also opened up and spoke at the Women's March anniversary in Lansing, Michigan in January 2018. She also spoke at the first ever Indigenous Peoples March in Washington, D.C. in January of 2019. Summer 2019, she spoke at the Crazy Horse Memorial and Museum in Custer, South Dakota for their Talking Circle series. She has also become the accidental activist and speaks to different groups about intergenerational racism and trauma that helps to bring awareness to our environment, the fight for clean water, and other issues in the Native community. A curiosity of her own heritage led her to Wisconsin, where she has researched the history of Native American tribes in the area. While Heather calls Michigan home, she has recently moved to Wisconsin and is now the Director of Cultural Affairs for the Stockbridge Munsee community. In addition to that, she also travels and speaks on Native American history, including policy and activism. Heather will produce her lecture on a history of Native American activism and policy. This presentation will be broken up into 2 presentations. Part 1 was last Friday, jeez. And part 2 is right now. So a little intro to this talk is, from the very beginning, the United States has dealt with Native Americans in a series of policies and treaties, but most of these policies were aimed at assimilation. And for many years, Natives were forced to live by standards set by the United States. But with the formation of the American Indian movement, they started to fight back. We're gonna learn about the beginnings of the American Indian movement and the organized protests that led to the occupation of Alcatraz and Wounded Knee. We will also learn how the activism of the 1960s lives on today and how we are dealing with issues in the Native community. For this talk, we will save questions until after the presentation. So if you have questions, please, please, please put them in the chat box, and remember to show appreciation with the reactions emoji and in the chat box. So please welcome me please welcome me Geez, join me in welcoming Heather Bruegl. Share reactions in the Zoom to let her know that we're here.
Thank you, Solomon. Thank you, NASA and Mesa and the University of Michigan. I'm super excited to talk with you guys again. I acknowledge the land acknowledgement for Michigan being on the land.
Hello,
All
sorry.
right. Yeah, I don't know what happened. I was talking and then you guys left me. But again, I'm excited to be here. I love the acknowledgement of Michigan being on the land of the Three Fires Council, as I was saying, and I'm coming to you from Northeast Wisconsin. My home resides on the ancestral homelands of the Menominee Nation. So I want to make that acknowledgement as well. And so I'm super stoked to be here tonight to talk to you guys. If you joined on Friday, we talked about policy. And tonight we're going to talk about activism. We'll do a brief, and when I say brief, like 30-second review of what we talked about on Friday. And then we're going to dive into to the activism side of this talk. So it's really exciting. It's one of my favorite things to talk about because it shows what a resilient people we are and how we didn't stop fighting and we kept going. So what I would like to do first is talk about the indigenous population, because I didn't talk about it on Friday, so I think it's important to talk about it right now really quick. So in the year 1300, it was estimated that the indigenous population on Turtle Island was around 10 million people. Around. We don't know for sure, but around. By the time of the 1900 census, the population dropped to its lowest at just over 230,000 people. In 1990, according to those census numbers, it climbed back up to almost 2 million. And according to the 2013 numbers, the indigenous population is around 5.2 million. Obviously, we're in the year of a census, so if you haven't done yours, please do so that we make sure we are counted. But the population of the indigenous people on Turtle Island still is about only 2% of the entire US population. So I think that's something really interesting to know about. So we still only make up a very small amount of the United States population. So on Friday, we talked about some policies, and I have them listed here for you. We talked about Indian Removal Act, and that led to the Trail of Tears. We talked about the Dawes Act, and that was allotment that broke up reservations and sold native land to non-native people. The IRA, it passed in 1934, tried to stop the allotment policy and return those lands back to the native people. Termination policy came in afterwards and basically terminated tribal status. And again, native lands were lost. Indian Relocation Act was part of the termination era, and that enticed Native Americans to move off of reservation lands and into the cities. But however, poverty was high and finding jobs was kind of difficult. We had the Indian Civil Rights Act, which was passed in 1968, which said that the Bill of Rights applies to Native Americans as well, whether they are on reservation or off reservation. And then we had self-determination in 1975, which kind of gave us a bit of autonomy over our governmental and judicial systems. The underlying theme, as we talked about on Friday, to all of these was assimilation. So that's something that I think is super important to know about, that the underlying theme was assimilation, and it was meant to move Native Americans into mainstream society, meaning a more Eurocentric society, and that we would give up our heathen or Indian ways, and we would live the way basically that white people did. Again, I'm going to use the terms indigenous, Native American, and Indian interchangeably because that's how policy is written. That's also how some of the activism happened, and those terms were used in that activism. In no way, shape, or form do I have any prejudice or bigotry or racism towards white people. It's just the way the history is written. We're going to talk about some really interesting things, and because one of them was getting kind of active, I do have 3 dogs, so if they bark, I apologize. But they're kind of chilling right now, but one is a bit of a pill. So without further ado, we will go into the American Indian movement. So I want to give you a little bit of background. The reason this particular presentation started, it was at the height of the Dakota Access Pipeline movement. So the no DAPL movement. And it was really astonishing to me that it wasn't being covered by mainstream media. I think I might have seen a little bit of it on MSNBC at one point, but in order to find out more information about it, you really had to turn to independent media sources like Democracy Now! To learn about what was happening about that. So I developed this talk while I was in graduate school. Did policy, did activism, combined them as one. How I ever squeezed them into one 45-minute talk, I'll never know, because I did more than 45 minutes on Friday. So, and it'll be around 45 minutes tonight, because I want to leave plenty of time for questions. But so that's how this talk was born. And it was actually, again, the first talk that I did outside of school that kind of launched into my lecturing. But so we're going to start with the American Indian movement. So A.I.M, how I'll refer to it as. A.I.M was formed in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which is about 3 hours from where I am. It's a very long and boring drive where you just see trees. In July of 1968, the founders included Dennis Banks, Clyde Bellecourt, and Russell Means. Dennis Banks was from Minnesota. He went to Indian boarding schools. When he was 19, he joined the Air Force. He had problems. He struggled with alcoholism and, some petty crimes. And in 1966, he went to prison where he met Clyde Bellecourt. Clyde Bellecourt was born on the White Earth Reservation in Minnesota. It's in the northwestern part of the state. He attended mission boarding schools, which are a little bit different than regular federally run boarding schools, and eventually dropped out due to mistreatment. He ended up in prison where he studied history. He met Dennis Banks, and the two formed the American Indian movement. Later on, there was the introduction of Russell Means. And Russell Means was born on the Pine Ridge Reservation, which is in the southwestern part of South Dakota, which we'll talk a little bit more about when we talk about the occupation of Wounded Knee. He, lived on several reservations when he was a young adult, searching for work. And in 1968, he began to work for A.I.M. And he rose through the ranks, and all of them continued to be active in the work for the American Indian movement up until their death. I do believe Clyde Bellecourt is still alive, though. And Russell Means was more considered the spokesperson. So when you see press conferences or testimonies before Congress, the very striking gentleman sitting there, the very dark skin and the long hair, that's Russell Means. So he's kind of front and center for a lot of the American Indian movement, speaking wise. Also doing the work, but more of the spokesperson. More than 200 Native Americans got together in order to discuss the issues that faced them. The group also addressed the issue within the Native American community, such as sovereignty, treaty issues, education, racism, and yes, police brutality. So I think that's kind of important to stress that, in 1968, Native Americans were facing police brutality. We still face it in 2020, along with our Black brothers and sisters. The group was founded to help the plight of the urban Indian. It was kind of founded in retaliation to the Indian Relocation Act. The Native Americans who left and became urban Indians, city Indians, were forced to leave reservations due to termination. There was a loss of culture and self when you left. There was extreme poverty, as we talked about during the Indian Relocation Act, with urban Indians living in the city. A.I.M.'s most important job, and the thing that they were the best at doing, was organizing mass protests across the country to raise awareness to issues within the Native American community. They were also very good at using the media to get their point across. Whether they ended up getting their demands at the end of a protest or a movement didn't really matter. They were good at using the media to get that point across. So the issues that were important in our community were now coming mainstream, and people saw what was happening. So I think that was very, very smart on their end, is using the media, good or bad, to get the point across. So we're going to talk about a few of the mass protests that they organized and occupations that they organized. And the first one we're going to talk about is the occupation of Alcatraz Island. So if you didn't know, before Alcatraz Island was empty, it was a prison. It was one of the largest in the US, had some hardened criminals that stayed there. But the prison closed in 1963. And the Bay Area Native Americans had been lobbying for a cultural center and a school to be placed on the island. In October of 1969, there was a fire and it burned down the American Indian Center in San Francisco. Alcatraz is off the coast of San Francisco. A group by the name of Indians of all tribes set their sights on the island and organized an occupation. And one of the major organizers of this occupation, his name was Richard Oakes. And as they were planning it and he was asked about it, this is what he said. He said, quote, "If a one-day occupation by white men on Indian land years ago established squatter rights, then a one-day occupation of Alcatraz should establish Indian rights to the island." So he was challenging that notion. He was using the same idea that the white settlers did when they came to what is now the United States. They just claimed it as their own. Well, guess what? We're going to do the same. And side note, sometimes whenever my husband and I are traveling and we're somewhere really pretty, I do it a lot in the UP. Let's say we're on the coast somewhere of Lake Superior. I'm like, I claim this in the name of me. So it's like, you know, in my mind, I've taken back a lot of land, but really haven't. So on November 20th, they made their move. A group of activists got together. They made their move. 89 Native Americans sailed across to Alcatraz Island. They demanded that the federal government provide funds to create a university and a cultural center. They made a personal touch by adding graffiti to the island, which is still there today, saying such as things as Red Power and the famous Custer Had It Coming. There was also a sign painted on the water tower that read "Peace and Freedom and Welcome." So they were very welcoming to other Native Americans coming across. The Native Americans claimed that Alcatraz was theirs by the right of discovery, using that same concept that settlers used when they first came to the United States. They issued a proclamation that listed their demands and intentions. They wanted to use the island to build a school, a cultural center, and a museum. They did, however, offer to buy the island for $24 in glass beads and some red cloth. And that is significant because that is claimed to be the same amount that was paid to the Native Americans for Manhattan Island. So they offered that same amount. The United States government did not take that offer. So it didn't work out in their favor. The Nixon administration decided to leave the protesters alone as long as they remained peaceful, because what was also happening during this time, you had the Vietnam War going on and you had protests around the country that were happening, some that erupted in violence, Kent State, for example. And so as Nixon didn't need any more bad press when it came to protesters. So he said, as long as these people remain peaceful, we're just going to leave them alone. The government officials did go to the island, though, several times to negotiate an end to the protests. While the negotiations were going on, protesters were settling in. They made the island their own. The population grew from that 89 from that first night to 600 people. There was a police force that they set up. Then they called themselves the Bureau of Caucasian Affairs. And they patrolled the shoreline for intruders. A Lakota man by the name of John Trudell joined the broadcast under the radio banner of Radio Free Alcatraz. And that's kind of where we start to see John Trudell and his works. There were many others that supported the protesters by shipping in supplies to the island. So even if they couldn't make it to the island themselves, they showed support by sending in supplies. But by the beginning of 1970, the dynamics on the island was changing. Many activists were students and they had to return back to school. The federal government decided that there was no hope of this occupation ending diplomatically, and after that, decision was made to cut the power to the island. Finally, citing the need to fix a lighthouse and a foghorn on the island, the federal government, who heavily armed themselves, ended the occupation of Alcatraz on June 11th, 1971. So from November 20th, 1969 to June 11th, 1971, this group of Native Americans held this island. They occupied it while making their demands known. While the protests ended without much changing, what it did is it fueled up Native American activists across the country to organize smaller protests and smaller occupations. And A.I.M would be there to help them. And it also brought awareness, probably for the first time in history, to mainstream society of what was happening in our Native communities, what was going on, and what we wanted, what we needed done. And so some of the smaller occupations that it led to was the occupation of Mount Rushmore, which happened in 1970. On August 29th, 1970, members of the United Native Americans gathered at Mount Rushmore to reclaim the island, to reclaim the mountain. And before Mount Rushmore was Mount Rushmore, it was the Sixth Grandfathers, and it's located in the Black Hills, which is sacred to the Lakota and Dakota. It is where they believe that the Great Spirit resides. So in essence, it's their church. It is where they practice their religion. And if you can ever go to the Black Hills, I recommend it highly. There's just a different sense of being when you're there. And so they wanted, to reclaim this mountain. The land had been promised to the Lakota in the Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1868. But however, with the discovery of gold in the Black Hills by a man by the name of George Armstrong Custer, the Black Hills were lost and were opened to mining. When park officials asked the protesters how long they intended to stay, the president of the United Native Americans said, "As long as the grass grows and the water flows and the sun shines." And the significance of that line is that is a line that is in the Treaty of New Echota, which is the treaty that moved Cherokee Nation to Indian Territory, so the eastern part of Oklahoma. And in the Treaty of New Echota, it says that the United States says that this land will be yours as long as the waters flow and the grass grows. So that's extremely significant. Another thing that happened, it was the first day of national mourning, also happened in 1970. And that happened over at Plymouth Rock in Massachusetts. November 26, 1970, A.I.M activists occupied the area of Plymouth Rock. This became known as the National Day of Mourning and was sparked by censorship of a speech by Frank James, a Wampanoag, at the 350th anniversary of the landing of the Pilgrims. And the Wampanoag, if you don't know, were the first to greet the Pilgrims as they came to shore. And the story of the first Thanksgiving revolves around the Wampanoags and the Pilgrims. But they wanted to, the organizers of the celebration wanted to censor this speech. The reason given for the censorship was that the theme of the day was brotherhood, and anything inflammatory would be out of place. James's speech included some harsh truths and said, quote, "History gives us facts, and there were atrocities." He also went on to talk of the loss of culture, loss of language, the loss of land, and the loss of life. His speech did end with a call for unity and hope, saying, quote, "You, the white man, are celebrating an anniversary. We, the Wampanoags, will help you celebrate in the concept of a beginning. It was the beginning of a new life for the Pilgrims. Now, 350 years later, it is a beginning of new determination for the original America, for the original American, the American Indian," end quote. So today, the National Day of Mourning is a day of remembrance and spiritual connection, in addition to being used as a day of protest against racism and oppression of Native Americans that we continue to endure. And it happens on Thanksgiving, and and Thanksgiving was made a national holiday by President Abraham Lincoln. And I know in school we're taught a sugar-coated version of Thanksgiving, and that's kind of difficult. And I do find it a little bit ironic that Native American Heritage Month is in November, where Thanksgiving falls. And so if you know the true story of Thanksgiving, you'll understand the irony in that. So those things happen. Those were smaller occupations and organizing events. The National Day of Mourning still happens to this day, and there is a new movement about Mount Rushmore, which we'll talk about later in this. So I now want to talk to you about the Trail of Broken Treaties. It happened in the fall of 1972, and this was a cross-country protest. It was designed to bring awareness to issues such as living standards, inadequate housing, and broken treaties. Super important. There were 8 organizations that helped sponsor this, including the American Indian movement. And this protest was a caravan that started in the West Coast in October, and it moved across the country, with the protesters reaching Washington, D.C. as their end goal in November, 1 week before the presidential election. So this was significant. And as the protest moved across the country, it grew in size. More people joined. Housing for the protesters was an issue once they reached Washington, D.C. So to solve this problem, the group occupied the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And it was also a way that they used that occupation as a way to get their demands heard. The occupation of the building was front page news. It made the front page of the New York Times. It was extremely significant. And I will say that last January, so 2019, at the Indigenous Peoples March, the march started at the Bureau of Indian Affairs building, and there were armed guards outside the building because they were worried about an occupation happening again, which I thought was kind of funny. So it was still a fear in 2019. And so this group, the protesters, they provided a platform for Indian rights and a place to present a paper that had 20 points on it. The Nixon administration refused to meet with the protesters or to receive their 20-point paper that defined some of their demands as the President of the United States should establish a committee consisting of both Indians and non-Indians to examine treaty commitments and violations. Another was that treaties that have not been ratified should be presented to the Senate. Another was the United States government should recognize and protect the spiritual and cultural integrity of Indian nations. And a final point was that the United States federal government should focus on the improvement and creation of better housing, education, employment, and economic development for Native Americans. So these weren't just some fly-by-night demands. These were some heavy things that we were dealing with in Indian country that we wanted heard and we wanted remedied. So after a week of protests, the end with negotiations by protest leaders and the Nixon administration, who, among other things, promised that in the future, to include them in future treaty negotiations. So if there were to be more treaties made between the United States and Native nations, which the US stopped doing in the 1870s, that they would include Native nations in this. When it came to broken treaties, one of the most famous broken treaties is the Treaty of Fort Laramie, 1868, which I did talk earlier about, that has took the Black Hills out of the possession of the Lakota, and that is the biggest one. And when you hear protests now, they do refer to the Treaty of 1868. And I would like to remind everyone, if you're not familiar, a treaty is a legal contract between two sovereign entities, and contracts have to be followed. They have to be enforced. And so it doesn't matter if the treaty was made in 1868, it is still enforceable in the year 2020. And that's just something that's not happening, and that hasn't happened in a really long time. So next we move to the occupation of Wounded Knee. So I'm going to give you a little bit of history, because the first time we encounter Wounded Knee in history is in 1890. Wounded Knee is located on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. It's at the heart of much of the conflict in 1890 was the ghost dance. And ghost dance was a dance that was practiced by many Native nations, particularly out west, that they believed that they believed that they had been confined to reservations because they had abandoned their way of life, and that if they practiced ghost dance, things would go back to kind of the way that they were. The settlers would go back to Europe, our lands would be restored, and things like that. So this was actually seen as a threat. This particular religious ceremony was seen as a threat to the United States government. So on December 15th, 1890, reservation police went to go arrest Chief Sitting Bull. It was rumored that he did not ghost dance, but he supported his people doing it. So they went to go arrest him, but instead of arresting him, he was killed instead. And so word of his death spread. And so Chief Bigfoot, also known as Chief Spotted Elk, begins to lead 350 of his people to the safety at Pine Ridge under Chief Red Cloud, who was there. On December 28th, the 7th Cavalry approached them and surrounded the group. And I want to very quickly say the significance of the 7th Cavalry is super important, because it was the 7th Cavalry that earlier was at the Battle of Little Bighorn, and their leader was George Armstrong Custer, and the Lakota, Arapaho, and Cheyenne basically wiped out the 7th Cavalry. And so they won the Battle of Little Bighorn. Of course, there was government fallout. More troops were sent in. So the significance of the 7th Cavalry approaching this group to Pine Ridge is very significant. So they approached them. So the next morning, which is December 29th, soldiers began to enter the teepees of the Lakota and started to disarm them. So they started to take away their weapons. There was one Lakota man who was deaf, and he was trying to explain the significance of his weapon to them. He had saved up, he bought it, it was important to him, but he was deaf and he didn't quite understand what was going on. And so what happens is, in this little tussle, the firearm discharges, and this starts a fire storm into the crowd of unarmed Lakota. This group was mainly made up of women, children, and elders. And the 7th Cavalry didn't stop shooting. They continued to shoot. They hunted down people who were running away, and it was awful. So anywhere from 250 to 300 Native Americans were murdered at the Wounded Knee Massacre. Again, most of which were women and children. The Wounded Knee Massacre was originally called the Battle of Wounded Knee, and soldiers were awarded 20 medals of honor. And there have been calls to revoke these medals because they are still issued, and they do hang in Washington, D.C. for you to go and view. So that is the significance of Wounded Knee. So now we're going to flash forward really quick to 1973. On the Pine Ridge Reservation, again, like I said before, doesn't matter if it's your 8th grade student government, doesn't matter if it's the federal government, doesn't matter if it's your tribal government. All governments are susceptible to corruption. And in 1973, the government at Pine Ridge was corrupt. Many leaders, including Dennis Banks in A.I.M, sought the leadership and alliance of traditional leaders on reservations. They had the most luck on Pine Ridge with gaining support, but they also angered the conservative tribal chairman Dick Wilson, who ruled with an iron fist. He wasn't fond of full-blooded Lakotas. He gave jobs to his friends and family. He limited opportunities for people on the reservations. He undersold grazing rights to ranchers. And he had a group of people that surrounded him, and they called themselves the Goon Squad, guardians of the Oglala Nation, and they would attack anyone who opposed Wilson or his policies. So just 3 weeks before the occupation, the tribal council charged Wilson with several items for impeachment. There was great concern over the justice system in border towns as well, because to convict or even prosecute a white person for committing a crime against a Native American was virtually non-existent. And a good source of that is to watch A Good Day to Die, which is a documentary that you can get on Amazon Prime, and it is about an occupation that happened in Custer, South Dakota, and it talks about how a white person was not even tried for the murder of a Native American person. So something had to be done, and the elders decided to invite members of A.I.M to take a stand on the sacred ground of Wounded Knee. So that's extremely important. So on February 27th, 1973, the occupation of Wounded Knee began. They demanded that Wilson be removed from office. They demanded immediate revival of treaty talks. 10 days into the occupation, roadblocks were set up to block people from entering the town. There was gunfire nightly. At one point during the occupation, the group declared themselves the independent Oglala Nation and demanded to speak to the Secretary of State. Elder Frank Foolscrow and a small delegation actually went to the United Nations and asked for recognition. They didn't get it, but following the incident, the UN became aware and involved of the rights of Indigenous people across the globe. So that was a good thing that came out of that. After 71 days, the occupation ended on May 8th, 1973, but the violence on Pine Ridge didn't stop. There were several murders of people who were at the occupation, and a lot of people believe that the murders of these people were done by Wilson and his goons because he did remain in office. So it didn't solve anything, but it made national news. Celebrities were there in order to get supplies to the people in Wounded Knee. Vietnam veterans would fly over, drop supplies down, and leave because they couldn't get there through driving, so they did it through flying. Something that happened on a smaller scale here in Northeast Wisconsin was the takeover of the Alexian brothers novitiate. If you are not sure what a novitiate is, it is a place where young men go to discern to decide whether or not they are going to enter the priesthood. And this novitiate is located about 45 minutes from where I live, that way. And it is on ancestral Menominee land. And I've done a lot of research on this. And so I'm actually in the process of writing on this, but the Menominee Nation were victims of termination. They were actually the first tribe in the United States to be terminated through termination policy. And that threw the tribe into disrepair. There were high rates of drug and alcohol abuse on the reservation. And so there was a group that formed, and there was the Menominee Warrior Society. And the Warrior Society looked at the novitiate, which was no longer occupied, by the way. It just had a caretaker and his family there. So everything, the Alexian brothers are based out of Chicago. And so they no longer needed this place up here anymore. They just moved back down to Chicago. So they looked at the now empty novitiate and decided that this would be a really good place to have a rehabilitation center. It was literally just a mile from the Menominee reservation, the recognized Menominee reservation. So the takeover began on January 1st, 1975, and it ended after 34 days. What happened is they were able to negotiate for the novitiate for $1. And there was like a napkin that was signed, and because they were working with very little here. So there was a napkin that was signed. I believe 4 quarters might have exchanged hands at the time, but what happened is the sale didn't end up going through. The Alexian brothers sold to another organization in Green Bay, and the people who were inside of the novitiate were tried for numerous crimes. And what it did is it brought national attention to a very tiny part of the United States. The National Guard was brought in. There was a whole bunch of things that happened. Marlon Brando actually came here which I found interesting. And the picture up here is that you see on the slide here are supporters who were outside of the novitiate. I've interviewed several people because they did put roadblocks in to get to this. But I mean, if you know if you live in the rural area, you know the back ways into every place. So they were still sneaking in to the area, and there were supporters sneaking in, supplying food, supplying blankets, because they did this in January. And if you know anything about winters in Northeast Wisconsin, they're very cold. So it was a hot mess. And the reason I include this in here with A.I.M is because A.I.M was loosely associated with this, while it was the Menominee Warrior Society that actually took over this novitiate. A.I.M came in to help in with negotiations. So you had Russell Means here in Kashina, which is the seat of government for the Menominee Reservation, and you had Dennis Banks, and you had the National Guard, and the governor got involved, and so it was a whole big mess. Fun fact is the occupation ended after 34 days. They only had enough ammunition for 1 or 2 days, so they held the entire thing without any ammunition, and nobody knew about it. So that was actually pretty interesting. That I found that very interesting in the course of my interviews during with people. One of the people that I did get to interview was the great Ada Deer, who was the first female chairperson of the Menominee Nation, first female secretary of Bureau of Indian Affairs under Clinton, and she is alive and well, living down in Madison, well into her 80s, and she makes me tired. So that was probably one of my most fun parts, is I got to talk and meet with Ada Deer. But other than occupations and protests, we have activism in other ways. We have education activism, and we have activism through our own policies. So education, many Native Americans went to college and became lawyers, doctors, social workers, and then they went back to their reservations to work with their people. Tribal colleges were established in a push for education among Native American people. The Navajo community colleges received a grant to begin construction in the early 1970s to establish a tribal college for the Navajo Nation. This became the start of tribal colleges throughout Indian country. Language and culture was taught, and you got the benefit of being able to go to college but staying close to home. Today, there are 36 tribal colleges throughout the United States that are fully accredited, that offer 2- and 4-year college degrees. I live 30 minutes from the College of Menominee Nation, maybe more like 25 minutes from the College of Menominee Nation right there, and they are amazing. We have activism in our culture, in our language, and in our religion. Many Native Americans returned to reservations to learn, to talk to our elders, and to learn traditional ways. Through policy, we have the Indian Child Welfare Act in 1978. There was a crisis that was happening in Indian country, and it was affecting Native American children. 25 to 30% of Native children were being taken from their homes and extended families and being placed in child welfare and private adoption agencies. The BIA in some cases would pay states to remove Native children and place them in religious and non-Native homes. 85% were placed in non-Native homes, even when there was a fit and willing relative that wanted to take the child. Many religious groups were involved in the removal of children, with the largest being the Mormon Church. The Mormon Church actually had an Indian placement program where by the 1970s, they had placed 5,000 Native American children into Mormon homes. There were some reasons that were identified by Congress for why the rates of children being removed were so high. In 1978, against opposition from church groups, several states and social welfare groups, President Jimmy Carter signed the Indian Child Welfare Act. And when placing children in homes, caseworkers now had to consider 4 things. They had to providing active efforts into the family. They had to identify placement that falls under the qualifications laid out in the act, which does prefer a Native home. They had to notify the child's tribe and the parents when custody hearings were happening. That's a big one. They weren't doing that beforehand. Now they had to. And they had to work actively to involve with the child's parents and the child's tribe in court proceedings. So you were privy to be able to be there. Before, they would just shut you out. So the Indian ICWA was beneficial in making sure that Native children were being placed in Native homes, or if there was a competent Native relative that would be able to take them in. ICWA's constitutionality has been called into question the last couple of years, and I'm actually working on something about that. So hopefully I can talk to you later more about that. The other thing is we had activism in our religion. We had the American Indian Religious Freedom Act that was passed in 1978 prior to colonization. We weren't Christians, believe it or not. We practiced our own religions and our own traditional ways. As part of assimilating Native Americans into mainstream culture, the US government banned us from practicing our ceremonies, including Sundance, Ghost Dance, and sweat lodges. So a lot of us did it in secret. We went underground. But having to do it underground, you lose participation, and then you lose that tradition, you lose that culture. Due to allotment and the use of reservations, many sacred sites were also not allowed to be used by tribes. With the passage of American Indian Religious Freedom Act in 1978, it was finally made legal for Native Americans to have full religious freedom to practice their traditional religions. So even though the Bill of Rights guarantees us the right to practice our religions, Native Americans couldn't do it until 1978. The act guaranteed 4 things: the ability to practice traditional ceremonies in homes, public places, and prisons; access to ceremonial sites, whether they are on reservation land or not, and that includes national parks. A lot of national parks, particularly out west, include sites that are sacred to a lot of Southwest tribes. This act guarantees us the right to be able to go in and practice our religions at these sites. Use and possession of ceremonial sacred objects, that includes feathers, and freedom to worship through ceremonial and traditional rites. The act was also a catalyst to the passage of NAGPRA in 1990, and NAGPRA is Native American Graves and Protection Act, which is super important. Helps us protect our sacred and cultural sites. You also have the Violence Against Women's Act, but the revised act in 2013. This act was first signed in 1994 under Bill Clinton. Violence against Native women is high, with statistics usually showing that 3 out of 5 Native women will be physically assaulted in their lifetime. Native American women have a violence rate that is 2% higher than other groups, and most often the assailant is a non-Native person. Prior to the revised act being signed, if an act of violence was committed to a Native woman on a reservation, tribal courts didn't have jurisdiction. With the revision of the act in 2013, the act made it possible for tribes to arrest, prosecute Native and non-Native assailants who commit acts of violence against Native women. However, I want to put a disclaimer into this. There's only certain things that the Violence Against Women Act actually allows tribal courts to prosecute non-Native people for. And there's a lot of things that you cannot prosecute a non-Native person for in regards to violence against Native women. You cannot prosecute for murder, sexual assault, domestic violence, child abuse, and there's something else and I can't think of what it is. So it's good and bad, but there's a lot of things that you cannot do still as a Native tribe. And that's where jurisdiction comes into play. State jurisdiction, tribal jurisdiction, federal jurisdiction. That's a whole other issue. So, but I also want to point out right now that currently we do not have a Violence Against Women's Act. It has not been renewed. There were talks, but talks stalled in 2019. This act has to be renewed by Congress every 5 years, and it has not been yet. So we are currently just basically sitting ducks. The other thing I quickly want to talk about is Standing Rock and the privatization of reservations. So everybody knows what Standing Rock was. I don't think I need to go into too much detail about that, but it was a pipeline that was going to go through near Standing Rock under the Missouri River. It was an oil pipeline, so there was the chance for oil to leak. And it was going through sacred sites. There was a huge protest that broke out, and we had thousands of water protectors going to this area to protect it, native and non-native. And so over this past summer, the pipeline was shut down. It was ordered, there was a new environmental impact statement that needed to be ordered because the courts ruled that the first one wasn't done correctly. So I think that that's something super important to note, that even though there was a huge fight and the pipeline went through, we've gotten it reversed a little bit and we're able to get new environmental impact statements done. There was also talk of privatizations of reservations. And this is important because privatization of reservations is basically just modern day termination, because there's a very good reason why. Reservations make up 2%, only 2% of the land in the United States. Basically, if you took all the reservations in the United States, they would really only make up the state of Idaho. Like, it's not a lot of land. But they contain resources that include oil, gas, and coal reserves that make up $1.5 trillion. So that's a lot. That is a lot. And that's a lot that we are telling, gas companies and coal companies and oil companies, you can't come in and take. So there is the possibility that reservations could be privatized. The current administration has suggested, literally right after they took office, that they would become privatized. And it would put more than 56 million acres of tribal land into private hands to free up resources. Those against privatization say the land, now this has been the goal since colonization, and it would strip away sovereign status that a tribe has. And historically, again, it was termination. So there is the possibility that that could happen. I don't think it will, but it possibly could. Then there was also a Ute tribal land grab proposal that was done by 2 congressmen in Utah while President Obama was still in office in 2016. It wanted to take 100,000 acres of tribal lands and hand them over to oil and gas companies. It also seeks to remove the protection of 18 million acres of land in eastern Utah to prevent President Obama from making Bears Ears a national monument. However, in late December of 2016, President Obama designated 1.6 million acres of land in Utah and Nevada as national monuments, and this included Bears Ears and Gold Butte, and protects the land from drilling. The act that Obama used was the 1906 Antiquities Act in order to preserve the land. And the 1906 Antiquities Act was actually signed into law by Republican President Teddy Roosevelt, who is a big champion of national parks. However, since the current administration has been in office, they've scaled back protections and are possibly opening it. I believe most of the area is opened up to current gas, oil, whatever drilling companies are just trying to figure out what they want to do with it. And on finally Friday, somebody asked me about the land back movement, and it was something that I was not thoroughly familiar with, but something that I looked up and I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about. So the land back movement was actually launched this year on Indigenous Peoples Day. So last Monday, or Monday before, I can't remember because all my days are running together. And the land back movement is an effort to dismantle white supremacy and achieve justice for Indigenous peoples. The movement comes on the heels of the land defenders who on July 3rd were blocking traffic up to Mount Rushmore for a Trump 4th of July rally that he was having there at Mount Rushmore in the middle of a pandemic, I would like to point out. So these were land defenders that were blocking traffic, and they blocked traffic for a good 3 hours, which I was watching, on my social media and things like that. So, and again, Mount Rushmore is in the Black Hills, which is sacred to the Lakota people. And what the land back movement does is it has an aim at closing down Mount Rushmore and returning all public lands in the Black Hills to the Indigenous people. So there are 4 demands that this land back movement has. The first is to dismantle white supremacy structures that forcefully removed us from our lands and continue to keep people in oppression. And those groups that they've included in that is the Bureau of Land Management and the National Parks, which both fall under the Department of the Interior. The second demand is to defund white supremacy and the mechanisms and systems that enforce it and disconnect us from stewardship of the land. This includes defunding of the police, the military industrial complex, border patrol, and ICE. Third, they want the return of all public lands into Indigenous hands. And 4, consent, moving us out of an era of consultation and into a new era of policy around free and prior informed consent. So these are some pretty intense demands. And I'm learning about the land back movement. I do personally, I do believe that the Black Hills should be returned to the Lakota because it says that in a treaty. And I'm actually working on a talk about that in the process of this. And I do believe that, this Mount Rushmore, I went and saw Mount Rushmore. It's not that impressive, especially if you go and see Crazy Horse Mountain. Mount Rushmore is not that impressive. I think we can do without it. And to have a symbol of 4 men, 4 presidents who worked against Native rights on this mountain in the Black Hills is kind of like a slap in the face. So again, I want to leave you with some recommended reading and documentaries, and I'll leave this up while we take questions. But again, I know I suggested it on Friday, but An Indigenous People's History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. I cannot tell you how important it is to read this book. This book should be in your personal library. You should have it. It's really good. Lakota Woman by Mary Crow Dog is a book that was written by Mary Crow Dog. And it talks about her experience in the American Indian movement and her time when she was at Wounded Knee, at the occupation of Wounded Knee. She actually gave birth to her first child while she was at the occupation of Wounded Knee. Another book is Unlikely Alliances by Zoltan Grossman. And this book talks about the Native community and the non-Native community coming together to work towards stewardship of our environment, which is super important. If you want to learn more about the Land Back movement, I recommend you go to landback.org. You can also visit the NDN Collective, which is a sponsor of it. A great documentary to watch is Trudell. You can get that on Amazon Prime. I saw that. You could also, for a time, I know I watched it on Netflix at a time. So if you are practicing your protesting of Amazon, which I fully support, I believe you can get the documentary on Netflix. And finally, if you want to learn more about the American Indian Revolution or movement or revolution, American Indian Revolution, but the American Indian movement, I recommend Revolutionary Left podcast and look up the podcast that they have, American Indian Movement. My husband listened to it, and then we went on a road trip not that long ago back to Michigan, and he said, you have to listen to this. And it's a long one. It's about 2.5 hours, but it is with Indigenous historian Nick Estes, and it goes into great detail about the American Indian movement, and it is something that I highly recommend to that. And you can get that wherever you subscribe to podcasts. I sound like the commercial right there. But so I, again, want to thank you guys for tuning in. I know I took a little bit longer than I thought I was going to, but I want to answer any questions that you might have. So I am open to any questions that anyone might have right now. So thank you so much, and I appreciate it.
I just wanted to say thank you for your words this evening. Let's give Heather another round of Zoom applause and reactions. And just to reiterate, we will now be moving on to the Q&A session, and you can pop your questions into the chat below.
There are no questions that are off limits. You can ask me anything. Whether it was about this, whether it was a question that you didn't get to ask on Friday about policy, yeah, whatever.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm interested. This was, first of all, a really great seminar, and this was very helpful. So thank you for sharing this with us. I'm wondering how we can be more conscious. How we can be more conscious of Native land when we're traveling through it, and what we can do to respect the people that live on the land.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I know a lot of us, even in the time of COVID and this pandemic, getting a little stir crazy, and we want to go on road trips because that's basically the safest way to travel right now because you can control, what you're touching and things like that. And so, and my husband is a photographer, and he's done this numerous times when he's gone to different areas, especially in the UP. What he does is, if he's not sure where he's at, he looks it up, or I look it up because I'm a bit of a nerd. But we always try to be mindful of where we're at. Look up that no matter where we are walking on native land. If we're going to stay somewhere, if we're doing something, one of the smallest things that I recommend that you can do is always keep a little bit of tobacco in your car. And when you get to wherever you're going, just lay the tobacco, send a prayer up to Creator or to God if you're a Christian, and just make sure you recognize the people who came there before you. You're walking in someone else's footsteps, and of people who were there beforehand. And I think the simplest thing that you can do is just to take a little bit of tobacco no matter where you're going, and to just to lay that and send a prayer up. The other thing that I think you can do is if you're involved in organizations, whether it is the University of Michigan, whether it is your you go to a favorite museum or you go to whatever, encourage those institutions to have land acknowledgements. That is so important. And if they need help with writing them, you can refer them my way. It's what I do. But just to even have something simple up, just a simple line that says, we're recognizing that we're on fill in the blank land, making that recognition is super, super simple and super important. I believe University of Michigan does have a land acknowledgement. But I mean, making sure that even, your local library, just smaller things, just reaching out, just asking the question. It's never a bad thing to ask the question about, are you honoring the land that you're on, right now? And I think that's just small things that you can do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We have a question in the chat from Megan Lees that asks if you have any extra resources for Native youth-led activism.
Ooh, that's a good question. So I would get involved in, so obviously there are student groups across campuses that you can get involved in. But one of the things that I would do is you really just need to, I would reach out to the NDN collective. There are groups that, like you can sign up for, you can get information on different activism happening in different areas. Again, like landback.org is a good one to do that, but also to reach out to the communities themselves, reach out to the youth in the communities, because a lot of times they're doing the work themselves. And there's usually groups within different Native communities that are doing things if you're not sure. Social media is a great way to connect with people and to find out what's happening. You can search different hashtags and find ways to help out that way. So for example, you can search the hashtag land back. You could search hashtag MMIW. You could search, oh gosh, I can't even think because there's so many. But for youth involved, I would definitely reach out to different student groups. I would, look at schools, universities, and even the schools that are on, reservations. They might have youth that are needing help getting involved. They might need, an elder or someone to help guide them in the right direction. But that's the one way to do it, is definitely searching social media groups.
Danny also wanted to share appreciation for the land back follow-up from Friday session. She said, thank you so much for both of these sessions and sharing your knowledge plus the land back content.
Oh, you are welcome, Danny. I had seen things on my social media regarding land back, and I wasn't quite sure what it was about. Like, I was like, okay, yeah, land back, duh. Like, we want our land back. But when I read more into it at landback.org, and things like that. It's definitely the movement behind it is so important. And again, it's not the first time that there's been a call for returning Mount Rushmore or the Black Hills to the Lakota. It's also not the first time that, you know, we've said that you know, Native land needs to be returned back to the Native nations. So I think and I think with everything happening in 2020 and the social awareness of everything that's going on, I think there's, you know, it's not going to stop. We're only going to get louder. And I think that's good. And I'm grateful to those who came before me, who made it possible for us to stand here today and demand what we believe to be right.
Bethany Beakley said, I'm interested in the intersection of Black and Indigenous communities and activisms in America. Can you recommend any resources? In addition to that, Bethany, just a quick little heads up, we actually have an event later on in the month dedicated to this topic, but I'll let Heather talk about it as well.
So my first thing was going to be tune into that event. Tune into that event. That's definitely something that's super important, because Black and Indigenous people throughout history, we've intertwined. Our paths have come right along with everyone, and we've been side by side for a lot of things in history. And so you can reach out. There are resources that you can reach out to online that talk about the Cherokee freedmen or the Seminole freedmen, which very interesting. Off the top of my head, I cannot remember the names of resources because you have to search for them, but you can definitely, there is a lot of information out there. The Library of Congress has a lot of information that talks about the intertwining of Black and Indigenous lives in communities coming together. I know that was not the best of answers, but definitely tune into what NASA is going to be doing later on, because I will be, because I want to learn more. That's something I want to learn more about, especially in the job that I do. You know, I come across photographs all the time in our archives where there's, you know, Black people standing with us Stockbridge Munsee and Oneida, and like, wait, hold on, what's going on? And, you know, we've got people who are enrolled in our tribe who, if you look at them on the surface, you'd be like, you're Black. What are you doing here? It's because our stories intertwined from the beginning. And so it's super important to know that and to recognize that. And so, like, for example, when February is Black History Month, I make sure that, you know, we put out content that talks about Black Indigenous people as well, because they're right there with us. So great question, and make sure you tune in to what NASA is doing later on in the month.
Well, if there aren't any more questions, to honor everyone's time, on behalf of our sponsors and the University of Michigan, I'd like to say thank you to Heather for sharing your words with us today. It is your strength, your creativity, and your determination that inspires us all. We would also like to thank all of you for joining us this evening. Be sure to visit the Native American Heritage Month website for the most up-to-date information on NAM events. We also have a lecture with Dr. Adrian Keene coming up next Thursday, October 22nd, on Native representations in the media. There's a survey link being sent out in the chat as well as via email. Please complete this so we can continue to show the university why events like this are important. Thanks again for joining us today, and thank you again, Heather, for sharing your knowledge with us. Happy Native American Month, and Bamapi.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.